Dive into this special episode from the Idea Citizen Summit, the bigger picture.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our Human-Centered Leadership in a Changing World section of the Idea Citizen Summit. This panel consists of Olivia Deitcher, CEO of Zest Health. She has championed accessible dermatology care and pushing the boundaries of how personalized healthcare can be delivered at scale. Mike Francis, CEO of NanoTech, has navigated the entrepreneurial journey with sustainability, including technology, and he's at the forefront of the products that he delivers. I'm a veteran PR professional, an author, and I have 2 decades consulting with C-suite businesses, mostly tech and healthcare. And so we're all demonstrating how we can try to see beyond the immediate. I would like to start with, can you share your perspective on how you navigate external regulatory pressure or changes without losing patient care focus and also while maintaining engagement with the patient perspective?
Yeah, happy to do so. And thank you, Susan, for hosting the panel. And also thank you to Idea Citizen for having me today. I'll add that it looks like some people in the chat also work in the healthcare space, which is exciting for me. I'm going to try and keep my answers here generalizable, but when you work in healthcare, I think you kind of bear that very, very externally and outwardly in your day to day. And to your question, Susan, I think regulatory changes or just the world changing is inevitable in every industry. I myself work in healthcare, but my partner runs a board game company. And so our jobs have like nothing in common, you would think. And the one thing I've found that we have in common is he's been dealing with the tariffs and changes to board game production and importing them to customers. Where in healthcare, and this may not be as loud and public to people who don't work in healthcare, there are like new tariff-like changes that rock our world every day, maybe every week, and certainly every month, that change what we have to bill or charge to our patients, how we have to manage and credential providers, how we leverage new technology in care. And so I think where it starts for me is actually in building my team, and that every person that I recruit to Zest needs to know that they are joining a startup. And startups, and I always say this, startups have chaos. Yeah. And what we want to do is create as much healthy chaos as possible. Unhealthy chaos is not good for anyone, but there's an amount of healthy chaos that you have to embrace when you're trying to revolutionize or change an industry that's as traditional or static in many ways as healthcare.
Absolutely.
And so that starts with the team. Everyone needs to know they're coming into a chaos filled environment. They need to like that energy, feed off that energy. And regulatory changes certainly create some of that healthy chaos. And then even despite that, they need to just keep their anxiety low, because I think high anxiety in a startup can be very fatal to the mission. And we don't want our customers, our patients, to feel our anxiety as they're interacting with our clinic. And so it's making sure that starting from day one, I have a team that can weather the storm of chaos and weather the storm of regulatory changes.
Well, certainly, have you used human resources to kind of categorize or segment different types of personalities that would, and then how they might deal with anxiety, or how do you do it when you're hiring your team?
Yeah, I think there's some like kind of existing guidance that I would actually reject, that a lot of folks said when you're recruiting for a startup, you should look for people who already have that startup badge. Right? Like, don't find people that have only worked inside of large matrixed organizations because they can never adapt to startups. And I just fully reject that. I think that it's an individual by individual basis. And so, Susan, I agree that you have to, first of all, allow people that maybe don't have a startup background into your candidate talent pipeline. And then from an interview perspective, I would say there's 2 main things that I prioritize to make sure there's actually a little bit of chaos in the interview process, healthy chaos. I think the first is, don't try to act like, as a founder, like myself, that every single button is buttoned up at the company. I think too often when we recruit people, we share a very rose-colored glasses view of our company. And that's correct to some degree. You want to sell extraordinary talent on the company you're building and the company they could be joining, right? Like, they're joining a rocket ship and you want them to know it's a rocket ship, but even rocket ships are a little chaotic sometimes, and they have to be able to handle the pressure of being an astronaut. And so I think the first thing is just bringing candor, bringing honesty, a little bit of transparency into what is currently buttoned up and what isn't at the company, and where that person's role can help fill in the gaps that exist. I made really big mistakes early in my founder journey, and I think over pitching candidates, and then when they joined the company they were like shocked at how startup-y it was. And I want people that are sold and bought into the startup experience. And then the second thing that we do is that our final round interview is always a big chaotic panel interview where we bring multiple function leaders across the business. And I encourage my team, throw out something wacky, throw out something that's a non sequitur, a distraction, that's core to the value prop that we're discussing, right? If it's a marketer and you ask a question about product, they should say, that's really interesting. Here's some thoughts, but my key focus is going to be on enrolling patients to the clinic, right? And see if you can find someone who's able to organize the voices, the chaos, the opinions in the room, the passionate opinions, which also come with startups, and really bring it back to our core mission, which is serving patients better than ever.
That sounds like a lot of work, Olivia. Mike, I would love to know if you feel, if you can share your tactics on internal management of adapting rather than external to industry shifts, and when the industry shifts, potential shifting direction, because, that causes definitely issues within the team. So can you share with us, your tactics, how you keep your team motivated, but still aligned with the mission when things might be shifting?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. And I couldn't agree more with everything that Olivia said. Well said there. So NanoTech, we started out of a two-car garage with just a couple of people in the garage, and now we're in a 45,000 square foot facility, and we have getting close to 40 people. And one of the biggest things that I think about all the time, so we have a fantastic technology. Great technology sits on the shelf without great people. And when I think about talent, I don't go after the smartest person in the room. I look at it as, how am I building a mosaic, and what pieces of color can we put in to build this mosaic of talent? A lot of my early mistakes is, you hire polished, let's call them salespeople or executives, that they come from a great background from a Fortune 500. But when they get here, I like to call it Startup Island. They feel, they're on Startup Island. They don't have the resources of a Fortune 500. They're having to rely on themselves. They're having to, of course, we get each other's backs, but we're all just very, very busy. Um, and so in that type of state, what I really spread throughout our entire organization is, be the CEO, be the co-founder of your own domain. And if we really think about it, the leap that it took for Olivia and I to found something, it's not such a drastic leap for that second and third employee. They're still making that leap. And it's just at a different stage, a different risk profile, but it's still risky. And so I always look for people, I try to talk about it because it is extremely fast paced. You can get caught on Startup Island, and you're looking, and you can't rely on anybody but yourself sometimes. And I love watching people evolve. They'll evolve from, someone that has been, running a Fortune 500 department, to now they've evolved into building something from nothing. So they have their own garages, hypothetical garages that then they can scale out of. And when you position it, and this is our culture, when you position it in that mindset, and their inputs match their outputs, meaning what they're putting into nanotech, they get directly back to them in purpose, in finances, and everything. You now have this thriving culture where we really get things done at a much, much, much faster pace, because we all have that mentality. And if the ones that don't have that mentality, you can identify pretty quick. And then now, as you start to grow, maintaining that culture is just so important, because if you don't maintain that culture as your company grows, you kind of get stagnant. And so it's my job to really push everybody and say, what's the latest and the greatest? And let's drive for innovation, even though that we're at a kind of a growth phase of our company.
So with that, and when you say you push people to let you know and communicate, what's the latest and the greatest. So how do you keep that, stay on that fine line of allowing people to have basically figure out their own purpose towards the mission? And then, so how do you manage your employees to help them stay motivated in the game? In other words, you're asking them and they're telling you, but where does the give and take come in that approach? So do you have like team meetings? Do you do one-on-ones? Do you manage, there's all different kinds of things. Weekly parties where people talk. I don't know. So how do you manage that? Because that sounds like a very fast paced, as it should be in a startup, kind of a lifestyle work style. So I would be interested. And I think a lot of people would want to know how you do that.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is we have a purpose. So our particle can go into a lot of building materials to either make it fireproof or energy efficient. We're fireproofing out in California. We're working, directly with the government entities there to really solve grand challenges. Our other technologies, they go on buildings, they reduce energy consumption sometimes up to 40%. And it's very, very economical. And so, one, when you have a purpose, you get really good people that are purpose driven. I don't want to be in a startup if it's not purpose driven. I like the intersection of grand things to solve with the team that can solve them. I'm a little different. I go the opposite. So I try to eliminate at least internal meetings. They're the bane of my existence. So I
Right.
try to eliminate those meetings as much as possible. My primary metric for myself is, and this is the honest to God truth, I'm trying to remove myself of being the important person in the room. I'm trying to obsolete myself so that the team and the organization become a thriving organization without me. And so if I look at that as my primary metric to say, my metric is to be obsolete, that means that I have to build a company. And so instead of just having a technology and people, now, you think about the processes, you think about the culture, you think about all those things that make an organization a thriving organization. And it's working. And that, it hasn't always worked, but it's working where we have that every single person on our team views themselves as their own CEO. And then we have a lot of ad hoc get-togethers, and then our meetings are around either deciding something or they're around we'll do longer kind of brainstorming strategy type of thing. But information exchange just happens in more ways that don't suck so much time, because the only thing that matters to us at this point, we don't think in quarters. We don't think in months. We don't think in weeks or days. We think in minutes. And so every minute that we can acquire to driving the business forward and acquiring those customers and solving grand challenges is how we start to benefit the world. And so everybody gets that. And it's worked, since we've been 3 people and now over 30 people. It's just keeping that as you grow and grow and grow. And I think you have a pretty interesting competitive advantage.
That sounds excellent. And Olivia, so I think I'd like to know from you too how the same thing, how it works with your team.
Yeah, no, I think that there's some common threads with what Mike just highlighted, and then probably just two different leadership approaches. I think it's worthwhile to call that out for folks that are considering founding companies or currently leading teams, and probably trade-offs to each. So I think the number one thing that resonated most for me and what Mike said is we also, and I often talk to my team about this, is try to maximize actions per minute. That is a KPI, actions per minute.
Right.
And one of my just key philosophical beliefs as a person, and I had a mentor tell me this early in my career, is it's always good to do things. Doing things creates more things to do, which then will create something else to do, which might end up being the biggest opportunity the company has. Stagnancy, waiting, those are not good attributes or activities for companies, especially startups. And so I love what you said, Mike, about just time frames, is that we also think in actions per minute. How can we be doing the most? And I think my leadership approach to that particular challenge for companies is a little bit different in that I try to be in the weeds in ways that is productive. I want to, first of all, know my business really well. I am publicly talking about my business, publicly selling my business to customers, talking to patients, talking to health insurers, talking to buyers. And I get asked really hard questions that require me to know the details. And I want to lead by example for my team that I know my stuff, that I'm listening, that I can speak to those intricacies. And especially in bringing it back, Susan, to the topic of regulatory changes, it can be a huge distraction for my team to constantly be keeping up with healthcare news, right?
Right.
There's so much healthcare news all the time. And right now in particular, and it could be a huge distraction that actually won't maximize our actions per minute if my entire team is in parallel all reading healthcare news. And so I try to position myself as staying really close to healthcare news, keeping my finger on the pulse of what could be happening on a macro environment scale that is relevant. So I can be the filter. And then I always just communicate back to my team then. And I agree, Mike, internal meetings can be a huge drain. And so tools like Slack or Discord or whatever it may be are
Right.
great ways for me to actually collect my thoughts on important healthcare news and communicate them asynchronously to my team so that when they have time, when there's a breather, they could say, oh, that's interesting. They just changed regulations on high deductible health plan members. That's relevant for our patients on high deductible health
Right.
plans. And so I'm serving as that kind of reviewer, experts, keeping my finger on the pulse and then delivering back to my business leaders what they need to know so they can stay focused on that actions per minute and executing against our very focused set of goals for our business.
That's my role every day with the people that I work for and consult with. And I have to be the big picture person. I see the difference between the leaders who want everybody's opinion and who take that time to do that. And that's one approach. And then sometimes it's just not required, because I think when you ask everybody their opinion, then you're really going to get in the weeds. But that leadership approach and letting everybody know that we've got their opinion, their needs, their wants, but still letting them run with whatever it is they have to do within that certain framework and laying it out, that's a successful approach. So I have a couple questions from the audience. Do you guys want me to bring that in?
Sure.
Sure.
Because some of them are relevant. This person, I don't have a name, but they want to know, does it make sense for a founder to fully immerse themselves in every aspect of their company? And what Paul Graham refers to as founder mode. Are there particular stages, crises, or opportunities that make that approach beneficial, or is it counterproductive to mindset in the long run?
Yes, you as a founder, one, you have no choice but to immerse yourself initially. Um, the intensity of an early stage startup of especially if you're self-funded, etc., you're doing everything and you have no choice but to do all of those things. As you start to grow and build, I am still in the mindset that you immerse yourself, and so the I may do it in a little bit of a different way than Olivia. So instead of the information exchange that happens or getting into the weeds of something that happens, I physically produce, I physically build things because that's what founders do. And so instead of, waiting in my office, waiting for the next meeting to hit, I'm always looking at ways to produce and make us better. So with the emergence of AI, we've been able to we're a hard tech, we sell a physical product,
Right.
but now we can simulate any condition in any building anywhere in the world almost instantly through the use of AI, also machine learning, etc. And then as this whole emergence of AI, I mean, it's here, it's absolutely here. It's teaching people that we can 100x our output by being very smart about how we deploy these new technology. And so what I'm looking at is how do we deploy these? I have a background in computer science, so I'm very, very interested and in tune with what's going on.
Sure.
And how do we deploy these agents to make not only our entire organization better and faster, but also the people? And there's something so fulfilling about seeing a person when they're struggling through something, and now that struggle has been accomplished through the use of having something that accelerates them like AI. And so, how do we actually look across the organization, deploy these things? And then that process for me is one way I get very, very immersed in the business. I get very immersed because you have to know every little detail in order for these things to work. And then the thing that it does is it develops the contextual intelligence as the company grows, as your team grows. And you do, multiple startups, you can just look at something and and the reason that is not that because you're smart or anything like that. It's because you have all of the tiny little details of the business, you have the experience, and when you see something you just know, and that's that contextual intelligence that is so important as the company grows.
And so what about you, Olivia?
Yeah, no, I love what Mike just said because I think that a common thread in what we're communicating is that it's important to exhibit as a leader that you are doing stuff. People don't want to, especially in the founder period, work for founders that are just sitting in a room and theorizing or thinking. And I think that can be very demotivating to my team that's working their butts off. My team is amazing and works so hard every day that they know Olivia's also working really, really hard. I got to see that, prior to starting my company, Zest, I joined a biotech startup, joined early and was there through IPO. And so I got to see the company evolve through many stages. And throughout all of that, the founder CEO was working harder than anyone else at the company. And that was really, really inspiring for me early in my career that he was pulling all-nighters on behalf of the business, right? And and I want my team to know that they can rely on me and trust that in crunch time, I'll be crunching just like everyone else. And it sounds like Mike takes a really similar approach of just being very action oriented as a founder and leader. And in particular, making sure those actions overall improve the functionality of the team and the success of the business. And I think that's really motivating for my team. That being said, I think that there have to be limitations on that. For, my business, we deliver the most accessible dermatology care in America. Can take months to get seen. And when you come to Zest, we'll see you next day. You have access to chat. And then we also specialize in getting patients clear skin for psoriasis and eczema without having to put them on intense medications. And as you can imagine, in pieces of that, I lean really heavily on my clinical team to be the leaders and the doers. That is their expertise. And you have to recognize where, as a leader, yes, you'll do, but also there's got to be moments where you say, hey, I'm not really sure. I don't know. I want to know everything about the business, but I'm not a clinician. And so I really lean heavily on my chief medical officer and her exceptional team to take certain parts of the business and to run them independently to make sure that, really the most expert brains on our team are solving the most apt questions. And that keeps my time focused on really accelerating, growing the business and managing and growing our team.
Okay, so we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit because I think people want to know. I mean, one of the main goals of this live is to give people takeaways that they can, actionable takeaways that in their own style they can maybe replicate or, have an idea over. So I'm looking at strategies and I'm looking at leadership. And because we know leadership changes every day. So how do we utilize strategies that motivate teams to focus on the big picture, but in order to maintain relevance and we manage our employees at the same time? So Mike, as a company leader with a product, a deliverable metric, and customer service guidelines, certainly, how do you motivate your employees and your managers' concerns in a human-centered way, or your employees or your team, whatever you want to call it? And so how do you do that? Like, do you do the same thing all the time, or do you just go with what's happening in the moment with the person in front of you or the met?
Yeah. So when I think, well, one, we hire really good humans with 100% with Olivia. There's this whole idea of grinding as a bad thing. And that's always been strange for me, even when I was a little kid. I loved cleaning dog kennels, even though it was cleaning dog kennels. I loved, when I had my first company, delivering craft beer to people, driving thousands of miles by myself. The act of producing is something that we should be proud of. You can, if you find people, so I like to hire people that think that they're Jordans and maybe even know that they're Jordans, but then have that very humbleness about them so that when they shoot the shot and they miss, they still want it the next time and the next time. The other thing that I do is I spend a lot of time thinking about people's fulfillment equation. My fulfillment equation is my family, my work, and my health. I don't go play golf. I don't go, I have these hobbies, and that's what makes me fulfilled right now. I love getting to the office hours before people and the sun come up, not because I like, saying I'm the first one here, is because I like producing. I like cleaning dog kennels. Um, and then that balance, that flow. So this whole idea of balance is not something the brain comprehends either. It's more of a flow in between states. And there's really no trading off one for the other. As when you're a founder, you're kind of flowing in between states. And then so when you look at people's fulfillment equation, my fulfillment equation might be very extreme to other people. And that's okay, because I want to understand and be empathetic to their fulfillment equation and what are the variables that I can control in order to make them fulfilled over a longer period of time. When we're very intentional about doing that, it becomes less about the reward mechanism and it becomes more about the conviction that that person has that they believe in something that they're doing that's greater than themselves. And so you're not leading by saying, give me this output, hit this metric. Those are things that boards put on me. What I'm saying is lead with conviction for the things that we actually believe in, because if we believe in it with all of our hearts, we have a very real opportunity to put our fingerprint on the world, and we will never get this opportunity again, potentially. And that conviction that I have has spread throughout, and they would not believe it if they didn't see me here with dew on my car, 3 hours before the sun comes up. They see that conviction, they learn that conviction, and then when they see the outcome with our customers, they're engaged forever because it becomes more about the purpose than it does the actual technology or company that you're a part.
That's great. And thereby that's the motivation. And discipline just plays into that because they're so hooked on this is our purpose. I think that's great.
I mean, we pay people very well as well. So
You're right.
I don't want to work with people that don't want to make a lot of money.
Exactly.
But you combine those things and it's fantastic.
Yep. So, Olivia, I have a kind of a different question for you with healthcare constantly under scrutiny. We've talked about this. How do you manage your employees' concerns and how do you help them manage that scrutiny? Because sometimes, I think for everyone, sometimes things do get to you. We can't all be just robots. So, how do you manage the scrutiny within healthcare and then how does that go hand in hand by keeping them motivated and understanding the mission, but also letting them know that it's okay?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, since I'm from Cleveland, that Mike, we might need to have the Jordan versus LeBron James GOAT debate following this
Oh,
panel.
I liked you so much up until this point.
I also went
Yeah.
to a different school in the Research Triangle than Jordan's alma mater. So I'm not, but anyways, we can have that basketball debate another time. To your question, Susan, and in all seriousness, I do think it's important to just acknowledge, yes, like certain industries are under a lot of public scrutiny. The industries have not done a good job from a PR perspective in communicating the industry's value to society and healthcare. It's been a really hard, and it's been a hard year because a lot of people have been deeply failed by the healthcare system. And what failure looks like in healthcare is tragic and horrifying. And so there is a lot of scrutiny. And I've seen that with our patients and with my employees. And I think that I'm going to make one general comment, and then I do want to give some tactical things that we've done around it. But I think one general comment to go back to mission and purpose is that in every industry that has problems and is broken, there is actually a heightened need for innovators and disruptors, a heightened need. The system is not working. So we need people that are good actors to join companies like Zest or build companies like Zest to change the things that are broken. And so I think I feel very, very motivated that we are doing what is needed in healthcare, which is increasing access, increasing human-centric patient care, giving patients long appointments, time to actually receive the care they need, and then making that care free to them. And that's what we need. And so I hope that I communicate that mission clearly, and that ethos flows through every action that our company is taking, that my employees feel actually really excited to be innovating and disrupting in healthcare nowadays and feel like proud to talk about our company. I'll say tactically just a couple things quickly on that. One is you have to celebrate the wins. It can be really hard and really punishing at startups in any industry, but certainly industries that are facing a tough time, to just feel like every moment is a loss. And you have to offset that by being really loud and really fun about the wins. Celebrate, truly celebrate. And celebrate doesn't mean like send everyone a company t-shirt. Celebrate might mean, and you have to know for your population what it means. It might mean like a day off. Like maybe they don't want to think about work, and that's the celebration and the reward for everyone. But we need to celebrate the wins. We also created a Slack channel that's just dedicated to celebrating wins and giving appreciations across the company. So when you see someone that is just really helped you, someone stepped up, it was late at night, you had a question and they were busy, but they stepped up on behalf of the team to support you on that, they get acknowledged publicly at the company, and everyone, including me, is able to say, wow, thank you for doing that. And we give it a cute name, and there's cute emojis, and just ways to build culture around the tough times so that you can still see the daylight and see the humanity in what we are doing, see the people behind our work. And I find that really motivating, and I think my team does too.
So, Mike, what would you say to people watching to provide a strategy or a takeaway? And, in that vein or any other vein that you think a founder of a startup to, keep purpose, and human-centered approach for management, what would be a takeaway that you would give to people watching?
Yeah, I guess mine's a little bit, it's a takeaway, but it's more of a mindset. I call it, you have to get not just curious, you have to enjoy building sandcastles. So sandcastles, they're fun to build. Not everybody's gonna enjoy them. They may fall over. If they fall over, that's okay because it's still really fun, building the sandcastle. I can't tell you how many disappointments that I've had over the last decade of, doing these type of things. I'd like to say that your skin gets really thick and you're not disappointed as much anymore, but that's not the truth. Every no hurts. Every yes feels like it is the best thing in the world. I love how you celebrate your wins, and it's also managing through the losses. So managing through the losses, everybody knows how to celebrate a win. When a employee or an early employee starts to get those first no's and those first losses and that disappointment that we as founders have all gone through, being there for that person or that team through the no's and through those disappointments is as important as being there for the upside of things. It hurts. We're invested in this. We've given up livelihoods in many cases. And so having a mindset that we're just building sandcastles, some are going to get kicked over by jerks and some are just going to fall over because the waves came in. But at the end of the day, we love building. And one of these sandcastles that you build, it's going to become a piece of art. And so that mindset really changes how your early people come on. And then, yeah, just be insanely curious. The grind of delivering for a customer, the grind of developing a new product, a new technology, it sometimes distracts us from what we are as founders and people. And that's curious humans that like to learn new things. And so that relentless passion about being curious oftentimes leads to breakthroughs, not only in your own mindset, but as you start to collide with others and intersect with ideas across the company, that's where breakthroughs really happen. And when you have those things, it makes just a nice little recipe for innovation to happen.
Definitely, I've seen the most successful leaders in any sector are the people that are curious, because by being the disruptors, and now we have to be, because we can't do it the same way that everybody's always done it. Even in my business, it seems like it's always a big picture business, but it's really not. You really have to dig in. You really have to ask the hard questions of the people like you guys that I work for, and they don't always want to answer that question, right? So I think it's so relevant, Mike, the insanely curious. And I think even Jackie in one of her lives with someone or a podcast, we were talking about, that phrase thought leader. It's so overused, and it's so, I just have to say, I can't jive with that.
I
Just,
can't either.
just to be nice, because what the hell does that really mean?
Mhm.
What does that mean? So Jackie brought it up, and I think a lot of people said, well, just, being curious. So it's so relevant, because if you're not curious, everybody's just hunkered down doing the same thing the same way, right?
They are.
And they don't, and then that's when people become really unhappy in the workplace. So it sounds like those takeaways are extremely relevant. So I'm looking at the questions, and from the chat, somebody really liked that, be insanely curious. They're stealing that. They're saying insanely curious. Here's another one. Do you find that and either one of you can answer this. I think we have time, right? Yeah, we have 15 minutes. Do you find that your investors, clients, or partners ever ask about your approach as a founder? Like, does anybody question you, or is the focus always more on the product or the offering? Do either one of you want to answer that or talk about it?
Yeah, I'm happy to tell from my perspective. So we are a company backed by investors and recently raised new capital. And I will say investors care deeply about team. Anyone that's raising, that is like for an early stage company, that's number one. I'll say for the stage of company we're at, it's probably number one or number two, with number one just being traction, and evidence of product market fit. But I think that is really, really important, because they are betting on people. It's like a racehorse. They're like, who's going to move the fastest and move the best? And so they're inspecting the horses, and you want them to be excited by the team that you have and make sure you have your bases covered. I think for clients or partners, it's really interesting how much partnership occurs off of relationships. And what's really great about my team is every person on my team could pitch our company. Every single person on my team could talk about the mission. Every single person could walk through the impact we've had for patients, from myself to a clinical provider to a software engineer. Every person gets that. And I think that that is important for clients and partners, because as we implement a new partnership or sell a new partnership, they're consistently meeting people that are all passionate and all like rowing in the same direction. They know that we are focused, we are laser focused on delivering the value that we promise we can deliver. And I think that matters.
Mike, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so we're fortunate enough to have, a great set of investors. We have Fortune 500 as investors, several billionaires, several venture capital, and it's a lot of people to make sure that I don't screw it up, basically. But what my mindset is on investors is they, other than your customers and your employees, they're who I think about all the time. And I'll give you a story just very briefly. About 2 years ago, we were one payroll away from not being able to make payroll. And we had a great team, but the cash was running out. And I had an investor who I'd gotten to know and become very close with and trusted. And he said simply, Mike, I got your back. And 1 or 2 weeks before we missed payroll and we had to make it up with our own money, he came in and he saved us. And investors sometimes they get this kind of bad rap for, trying to take over your company, this, that, and the other. That's can happen, but a lot of the times they're just people trying to play their part in your journey and give you that next tailwind that you need. And so my mindset towards investors is every morning, I don't have anxiety. I think having anxiety is, yeah, it can be bad, Olivia. When you wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is the belief, and it's no longer your family believing in you. It's no longer your wife believing in you. It's no longer, the people closest to you believe in you. It's people that trust you to deliver on the promise that you laid out before them. And I take that, very seriously. I don't change for anybody. Like, so I'm the same person in front of my family and my employees because it's just too hard for me to do that. And so they take a bet on me, and then they take a bet on the technology. They take a bet that we can build a fabulous organization, and knowing that messing up is going to happen. But focus on your investors just like you would focus, not all the way on your customers, but you should focus on them because they can pick up the phone and make things happen for you in a really, really important way.
Right. And that's the team. I mean, that's part of the team. Everybody's part of the team, and it's a necessity. Well, I think we have like 5 minutes. So does anybody have anything else to add that we can talk about in 5 minutes? I don't see any more questions. Let me see. I don't see any more questions.
Hi, Susan.
Yeah.
I just have like an analogy for something that Mike said that I think is really interesting around, celebrating the wins, but then how do you manage the losses and make sure that people feel like prepared for those moments, and resilient is really what I heard from your remarks, Mike, is that you're building resilience. Is I heard this week, and I myself am not a parent, but I heard that there is congrats. There has been a change in how we teach kids to ride bikes. And I thought this was really interesting, where when I was learning how to ride a bike, you would get training wheels and you would ride on effectively 4 wheels. It would give you false sense of, false stability, where you're not really riding a bike. You have all 4 wheels on the ground. And then one day your parents get out the screwdriver and just rip those training wheels off. And they're like, go, you trained, you were on a training bike, you should be ready to go. Where now they are taking bikes that have only 2 wheels, but they're just really tiny. And they put kids on these tiny 2-wheel bikes. So there's never stability. And they just gradually make the bike bigger and bigger so that kids' feet at some point just can't touch the ground and they have to balance. And I thought that was really interesting about a different approach to giving resilience. And I know it's about kids, and I don't mean to, patronize to employees, but I think there's some really interesting through lines to employees, which is not creating moments where you're going to rip off the training wheels, and instead creating opportunities to gradually get folks to balance on their bike.
That's great. We have to know we can count on ourselves. So we have to let our people know that they can also. And so, Mike, why don't you close us out?
Yeah, and I would just add, we've talked about internal team, we've talked about the investor team, we've talked about customers. When you set out on this entrepreneur journey, don't overlook the impact that it's going to have on your family and your friends. They're going to be part of your team too. And so managing that in a way that is both healthy for your family, healthy for your friendships, and thinking about them and putting them first as well is something that's very important. For those that have, kids, just being present, your mind is always going, your mind is always wanting to build. All they ask of us is that we sit still and we listen. And sometimes that lesson from a child is something that we can take to our employees as well. Sit still, listen, be present, be in the moment, and don't take their little growing hands turning into big growing hands for granted, because it goes by very quick. And as a founder, as an entrepreneur, you'll look and it's gone like that. So if you are looking at becoming an entrepreneur, above all else, love them, then love yourself, love your employees, love your customers, and love your investors, and be good humans.
Well, that's a great way to wrap it up. Clearly, we have to be present, even though we have to do all the other things. And that's the challenge, being present with everyone. So thank you guys were great. I think we had a great discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you for
Susan.
having us.